Hello, everyone. We are so glad that you're able to join us today for our DevSecOps discussion. For those of you who are new here, I'm Hannah Jennings, and I'm a tech and motion organizer at staff and recruiting firm Motion Recruitment, the founder and sponsor of Tech in Motion, which is our international tech event series. Tech in Motion was created over 10 years ago with the goal to bring our community together, share ideas, and inspire one another. We are constantly on the lookout for new event topics, passionate speakers, expert contributors, and more. So if you're interested in getting more involved in our community, feel free to reach out to me after today's session. I'm so excited today to bring you a discussion around the future of DevOps and cybersecurity. As you know, cybersecurity concerns are continually evolving as risks of hacks and breaches are only increasing. Prevention and swift action are crucial elements to a strong cybersecurity strategy, and DevSecOps may just be the solution organizations are looking for. Today, we have gathered our top DevOps and security leaders to speak about the growing DevSecOps industry and give their expert opinions and projections. A few housekeeping things before we get into the discussion. Please submit any questions you may have throughout the event, and our panelists will do their absolute best to get to each and every one of them. We're also recording this webinar, so no worries if you have to hop off a little early. We will make sure to get your recording sent via email. Now, without further delay, I'm thrilled to introduce you to our host for today, Jason Baum. Jason is the Director of Customer Experience and host of award-winning Humans of DevOps podcast for the DevOps Institute. He's frequently hosting important conversations about all things DevOps, and we are honored to have him here today to host our conversation. Welcome, Jason. I will let you take it from here.
Wow. Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Tech in Motion for hosting this, and thank you for the panelists for being here. And thank you for coming on and watching us talk about DevSecOps today, and I hope you participate as well. My name is Jason Baum, Director of Experience for DevOps Institute, host of the Humans of DevOps and AI Time Journal podcast. And as I'm sure you're aware, over the past few years, cybercrime has made a significant shift from targeting individuals and small businesses to major corporations, governments, and critical infrastructure. In fact, amid the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, Interpol reported that among its member countries, there was almost a 60% rise in phishing and scam fraud. And as security breaches increase among organizations, more and more companies want to make the security phase of development not only easier, but faster. With the rise of popularity in AI, cloud tech, and automation, DevSecOps is even more beneficial than before. I have some numbers. I always like to set the stage on my podcast with numbers. I feel like they tell the story the best. The DevSecOps market size was valued at $3.73 billion US in 2021. The DevSecOps market size is projected to reach $41.6 billion US by 2030. That's growing at a compound annual growth rate of almost 31%. In 2021, the rise in cybercrime from various sources was anticipated to cost the world more than $6 trillion US. And DevOps teams are running more security scans than ever before. Over half run SAST scans, 44% run DAST, and around 50% scan containers and dependencies. 70% of security team members say security has shifted left, and Gartner predicts the global cloud service spending will reach over $482 billion before the end of 2022, a 54% increase from 2020. 60% of rapid development teams embedded DevSecOps practices in 2021, as opposed to 20% in 2019. Pretty big jump. And most recently, DevOps Institute's 2022 Upskilling IT survey respondents indicate the most important operating models for the future are DevOps and DevSecOps. And I feel like that's a good place to begin this panel. So with me are our panelists, and I am so excited to introduce you to Mandy Walls of PagerDuty, Kapil Bareja of Saviynt, and Jamal Walsh of PHMG. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
To be here.
Glad to be here.
And let's just dive right in. We have a lot of questions to get to. I know you, our audience, asked a number of questions, so hope we get to everything. If not, maybe we'll have to do another one of these. Maybe they'll bring us back. So we're going to kind of do these in phases. The first phase, I guess you could say, is DevOps and security. When does the integration exist and how? So let's just throw out the first question to Mandy. Sorry, Mandy, putting you on the spot first, and then maybe we'll go around and kind of answer and just let's make it a conversation, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Should security be more of a consideration for DevOps teams? Where does it fit into the DevOps landscape and toolchain?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned in some of those statistics, like it's obviously increasingly becoming more of a concern for a lot of teams across multiple parts of the market, multiple industries. We see the big front page news for, FinServ companies and other places that are struggling or have had incidents in the past, but for everyone who has embraced over the past 2 years the increase in digitalization, the transformation into tech first while we've been home for the pandemic, the increased knowledge and requirements for security and privacy and all those kinds of things have really made their way into dev teams, into even more traditional operations teams. It's no longer as much a separate function as it was a few years ago.
Thank you, Mandy. Let's just keep it rolling. Feel free to jump in. I don't want to call on you like a teacher.
Yeah, no problem. I think from my point of view with DevSecOps and DevOps is kind of, I think security should be embedded kind of from the moment you think about developing some software to the point where it's in your customer's hands, and everything in between. And that's a lot of stuff to think about, right? I think, the old ways of doing stuff was kind of developing your things, getting them live, and then doing a pen test, and then remediating the issues you found once they're live. And quite often that's just too late, right? And that's why there's this concept of shift left. But even though, a lot of companies are shifting left, that shouldn't take away the importance of things that you do when your system's alive, right? There's lots of new ways that these cybercrimes happen on your website through, bots that are getting more advanced these days. So ensuring you've got the right technology, monitoring and analyzing who's on your site and what they're doing is just as important as shifting left. So you've got to keep your eye on the ball right across the board.
Absolutely. I think I echo with Mandy and Jamal, what you just said. You can't have a security for DevOps until you have a DevOps for security. That's, and every initiative which is going on, and the history, if we see, go back in 1976, that point, the folks were trying to define the quality of software at that time. That begins with the paper, and had different attributes came out, and specifically, they summarizes what it means for having a security at that time. So I know it's in 70s, there are not a lot of hackers at that time, but you didn't see a lot of software abuse cases. Occasionally you saw things like access controls come to the life, and then the firewalls come very essentially. That was the main beginning of the true security, right? So yeah, I think that's the integration for the manual deployments at the large scale of enterprises happened, started looking on the frequent releases, over the past few years as organizations moving to the cloud, or traditional methods of security are not, fit for all. There is a rise of security incidents and high profile data breaches are coming in. it's a well-run IT organization. DevOps and security operations has to be reinforced with each other, by identifying and pursuing the goals that are mutually beneficial to each other. So that's the landscape we are in. And the hypothesis over here is that we are doing a secure by design. The way we are doing this whole game changing thing is going to focus on the lean product development. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about what DevSecOps isn't as well. So I think some companies set up DevSecOps teams, for example, and that goes against all the principles of DevOps, right? Because you're creating a silo. So it's kind of like it's really important to embed the knowledge and the skills within your multidisciplinary teams. And I think that's one thing that organizations need to understand. You can't just kind of spin up a DevSecOps team and then and assume that everything's going to be secure. There's so much more to it to that, and I'm sure we'll come onto some of those things a bit later on.
Yeah, I mean, with that though, how do you segregate the duties that come under, now we're taking on security, so how do you segregate that?
It's really I mean, the organizations I've worked in, it's really difficult because different people have different skill sets and want to do different things. And I think one of the big challenges is cognitive load on people. There is so much engineers have to take on these days, whether it's tool sets, new languages, security, and the cognitive load is absolutely immense on people these days. So it's up to engineers and the organization to either bring people in to support those multidisciplinary teams, or give those teams the space to be able to skill up, learn the new tools, learn the new skills, experiment, and things like that. If people aren't given the space to do that, there's no chance on this earth that you're going to be able to successfully kind of secure your software, because people just get burnt out.
Yeah, I think there's a real shift there from security teams being sort of the folks who are there to certify your application before it gets into production, or do your pen test or whatever, to being more of an internal consultant, right? Helping your application teams with secure coding practices, with approved libraries, with good container practices, with whatever scanning software or other sort of golden paved road sort of practices, so that your application teams aren't hung up on security practices and you're not slowing them down. You're giving them, here's the safe, secure way we want you to go. If you do that, this is the fast way to get your stuff into production in an approved manner, instead of like spending all of your money and resources developing something and then security walks in and says, you know what, we can't put this in production. So moving all of that approval process earlier into the stream.
Yeah, and compliance as code is a really good. I know you've done some work in that space, Mandy, and compliance as code is a really good, tool that you can use in that space, where you're using code to validate things
Absolutely.
are being built in the right way, and automating that as well.
Yeah, it becomes part of your testing practice to start bringing that stuff in line.
Absolutely. I think this is where it's all about minimizing the handoffs, right? While doing the segregation of about, adding gates to minimize risk, right? So as we are moving in this direction, a lot of regulation are coming from the industry, like specifically in the finance and healthcare, right? DevOps has been quite challenging, and this is due to the fact that regulators want assurances being requested, approved by fully tested changes into production, as you mentioned, Mandy. And in the situation, the main control that is used to give the assurance, is in fact of those SODs. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of things to be considered, from not giving unnecessary handoffs, try to avoid transfer information needs to be transferred let's introduce a Chinese whisper effect over here, right? So yeah, it's one of the primary thing which I consider, having to be a minimum number of handoffs. And specifically, the focus should be on with the SDLC and apply the most processes within the team. That's the overall aspect of going to keep the duties separate compared to what we are doing right now in from the manual processes. Yeah.
So now you know, in some ways, maybe this should have been the first question. Um, let's talk culture. Um, you know, I feel like I'm sorry, I cannot remember who said defining DevSecOps. Was that Jamal?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah. So not going to ask you to define it because I feel like we already sort of know that definition. But what we didn't define was DevOps. And the thing, you know, we're talking about the future of DevOps and we're talking about DevSecOps. And I think in many ways, what we're talking, like, we talk security, but what gets forgotten is the whole point of why it's positioned here with DevOps is culture. It's the culture aspect, right? So perhaps we could talk about that and then also talk about the pros and cons of building a DevSecOps culture.
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to kind of explaining DevOps, I think the CALMS framework is like probably the best way to explain it, right? Culture, automation, lean, measure, share. And I think that really describes DevOps really well. And I think you could apply a similar kind of framework to DevSecOps, right? Same things. It's about culture. It's about automating. It's about being lean. Yeah. So for me, it's the same things, except it's having that security mindset in every step. And I think DevSecOps as well kind of goes beyond DevOps, because I see DevOps more as a, you know, from code commit to running in production. Whereas for me, DevSecOps kind of moves into the kind of agile side of things where you're doing your discovery work and your design work, because, you know, there's things like threat modeling that you can do really, really early on. You know, as you think about an idea and you start drawing out your designs, you can use something called threat modeling, which allows you to look at your solution design and identify threats using, there's a framework called Stride, you can use to identify your threats. And then there's another framework called Dread, which you can use to then kind of do risk analysis around those threats and identify and do some risk analysis of the things that may of the threats that may come in the design that you've made, so you can mitigate them before you even write a line of code, or you at least you have a list of things that you want to mitigate as you're writing the solution. So yeah, and again, yeah, I think
Totally.
calms
Yeah, yeah.
is
I think you
probably.
touched upon I think what it means, the four pillars, which, we talked about what's going in the organization to make a people, processes, technologies, and governance. That's the main change, those intersecting parts by eliminating those silos and creating a collective focus on, shared responsibility, what it means to bring in the mutual empathy, require a breaking down of barriers between the teams, right? People are the starting point in an organization, and the foundation starts from the, restructuring those the restructuring the DevOps and the security, how the teams can establish efficient cooperation. So yeah, it's all about those things and introducing the processes and technologies at the time and provide the cohesion and uniformity between them. Definitely will improve a lot of chance for having a good DevSecOps culture, which is a governance aspect when you measure the performance and the other elements of, you know creating a culture within the all organization. So that's giving an empowerment to that whole team, and the journey of this will go on and on to bring in, the addressing the deficiencies, and the main objective is to have a quick visibility for the overall readiness to adopt the DevSecOps paradigm.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Like, thinking back to some of the like earliest discussions about DevOps and even before calms, right? And like thinking about the incorporation of operational requirements into the application development lifecycle, and thinking about what does it actually mean for this piece of code that I've written to be performant in production when it gets in front of a customer. And now we are incorporating the security requirements for that as well, in the same way that we talked about yes, this needs to be performant in production. Yes, now it also needs to be secure, so that we are encompassing all of the user's needs. They're not going to think about it necessarily. They're just going to assume that we're doing it, and they'll be very disappointed when we're not. And that's going to be front page New York Times. So thinking about all that stuff in a way that is, the goal is we want to get good stuff in front of our users and not be traditional lockdown. Someone is a gatekeeper for getting all of that code into production, which security and systems administrators traditionally, that sort of scapegoat caricature, that's what those functions traditionally were in the bad old days before all this stuff got started.
What are the cons of a DevSecOps culture? Are there cons?
I guess,
Ahead,
I guess if you implement it in the wrong way, that would be a con, right? So, and I think sometimes, as with DevOps, right, things have these portmanteaus, you know, DevOps, MLOps, DevSecOps. They're great to kind of, spread the word and kind of, get information out there to people. But a lot of the time, the message doesn't get to certain people, and it's completely misconstrued and badly implemented. And it's really important to truly understand what DevSecOps means, because if you get it wrong, you can really cause yourself some problems as an organization. You can really slow yourself down. You could probably make yourself more insecure. So yeah, it's not implementing it correctly would be one of the potential cons.
I'm gonna let everyone else answer this, but it makes me think when you're talking about all the ops, and it's become like, so internal buy-in too, I would want to ask you about, because there are so many ops. It sounds like we're just taking ops and throwing it into a thesaurus. How many words can we come up with that we could pair with ops? There was even a picture that we were using to promote this, and mine said DevSecOps instead of dev, and someone put jokingly, is that ops that's for December? You're going to focus on security in December.
Sure.
I was like, who knows? It could be. That might actually be I think we just coined that term, and I'm going to go write a book. But yeah, so we could go back to other cons, but is internal buy-in, because there's so many ops, is that something too that you have to fight? So let's start with cons and then that.
So for cons, I would say, and it kind of relates to this, is that it can feel kind of overwhelming, right? Like if you have a more traditional practice and then there's a lot of silos, and maybe even your teams don't report into the same executive, so you're fighting against budget, and like all kinds of other crazy internal political things can still be possible. Like there is a lot of looking at where you are and where you could be that can be very overwhelming for a lot of teams, and it can feel like you're trying to climb a mountain or boil the ocean. And incorporating, just getting to DevOps, getting to cloud, then you've got DevSecOps, and then like somebody else said something about some other kind of BizOps or whatever, and it just, it can be for some teams, it can be kind of demoralizing to think about, well, here's where we are, we're never going to get there. And it's a long haul for some folks for that.
I totally agree. I think this is the thing that we are talking for long, but the organization is not being. This approach is kind of sabotaging the firm's efforts. It won't work without the open communication. That's the main key of the teams to be collaborate with each other. It should be accepted by everyone in the organization. I think some of the traditional, non-traditional working arrangements that we have seen in the past, it has to be broken. It won't fix anything. That's the main thing, because if we won't stop doing those things, convincing the leaders or the time does, with the success stories with the customers, this definitely will be a main priority for the management or for the executives to look at from the company perspective. And the major limitation that I've seen is mostly from the implementation. That's the main aspect. If you're not doing, I think Jamal has touched about, and Manny, you also talked about that. So that's definitely a bigger pain point. And the bottom line for here is to have to reduce the vulnerabilities. If you're not implementing correctly, the whole deployment model fails and the stability of the software product does not exist.
Yeah, and I guess for me, probably not a con, but more of a mistake in kind of implementation is that, well, there's a few really, thinking that you can just put some tools in place and you're now, practicing DevSecOps. That's
More
not going
steps
to
in that
work.
build pipeline, you'll be fine, right?
Yeah. And then I guess the other one is thinking that you've kind of completed DevSecOps. You completed it, but that doesn't happen. You've got, as similar with DevOps, right? You've got to take kind of a Kaizen approach, a continuous improvement. It's just going to be ongoing forever, and you have to accept that early on. It's going to take, if you're not thinking about security now, it's going to take you a long time to get to where you're seen as a kind of proficient. But that doesn't mean that it ends there. You've got to continuously improve. These bad actors are going to continuously change their game. They're going to constantly be switching it up, and you've got to be constantly on the ball.
Absolutely. And so much of baseline security is just hygiene. Like, you're not going to, I brush my teeth today, I don't have to brush my teeth anymore. You have to constantly be working on this stuff and keeping up to date with new packages and new vulnerabilities. And it's a constant stream of information that's coming in, even to keep up to baseline. And to abandon that means things start to rot. So we're constantly taking in all that information.
Yeah. And that's why I mentioned the cognitive load. And for me, it's really important because, you've got to really consider the amount of pressure and cognitive load you're putting on people when you start to kind of introduce this kind of stuff. You've really got to give people space or bring more people in. Make space in your backlog. If you've got a backlog there, make 20% worth of space for continuous improvement. And as part of that continuous improvement, make sure there's some security stuff in there, right? Because otherwise you'll move nowhere.
Itself. Yeah, exactly. That's where we have to increasing our software usage means more technical debt, right? Which can compromise the security altogether. That's where we have to keep our development very robust. That's to avoid any risk in future. And that's, I think the cognitive aspect is very important over here. Yeah, agreed.
Perhaps we can so let's shift gears a little. We'll go to process, people, technique, and then the one everyone always wants to skip right to, and because it's fun, tools. So what are some best practices, maybe some examples that you can give for organizations that want to seek and implement DevSecOps?
I can take that one, and I'll always come back to this. It's probably my favorite, and it's got to be threat modeling, right? I mean, it gives you the earliest insight into the potential threats that are going to be part of your software that you're building. So, that's, again, I think I mentioned it earlier on in the call. It's about sitting down with your team, designing the software on paper, actually on a piece of paper if you have to. Digital whiteboards are really good these days for this kind of stuff. I think there's an emerging tool market around threat modeling as well. I've seen a couple, that look to have some good potential. But when I started doing it a few years back, we kind of sat down with our security specialists in the business, and they went through it with us and explained, okay, first thing you've got to do, you've got to design the architecture that you're going to build, and then all the boundaries that are in there, how things communicate, what's being sent back and forward, what type of information. And then you kind of put down and then you look at that and you kind of analyze what kind of threats, what kind of exposure have you got from a threat point of view, and start to list all of those out. And then once you've done that, you take all of those threats and you analyze them from a risk point of view. So, how easy is it to find that exploit? How easy is it to exploit? Yeah. What would the damage be if someone did exploit it? Some things, if someone exploited, wouldn't have a huge amount of damage, but other things could completely take down your site and cost you your business. So those things then you can then take and put into your backlog as part of the solution design to say, if we do this, then we must ensure, you know, we're using TLS, we're using encryption at rest and things like that. So for me, doing that threat modeling really early on in any of your design and discovery work is hugely important. And probably it takes a while to get used to and understand the process, and you might feel like it takes ages, but once you've done it a few times, you get quicker and quicker and quicker, and you can reuse some of your designs, right? If you're adding a new thing, you can just, you know, take an existing design and pop a diagram on. Everything else still persists, right? You're just adding a new component. So yeah, that would be my kind of process of choice.
Yeah, I think you've touched upon a couple of good points, Jamal, and that's where to implement it's make automation your friend. That's a first best practice, or first main tenet of DevOps integration to be successful, right? The security controls and tests that needs to be it has to be embedded early and everywhere in the development cycle. That's we have seen across in all the development life cycles that happen with a manual effort takes a lot of time, and the stats that you have showed up has definitely increased the liability for the firm to look at and pushing new versions of the code into the production 50 times per day, for the single app to be maintained. So it has to be, one important characteristics to avoid, that manual practices that are running with the organization. Second, if we are talking automation, then obviously it has to be thoughtful. It has to be, it should not be like if you do a static scan at SAST, for the native builds that we do always for our customers, that interest in the code where you're committing every day in, day out. Trying to run the scans for the entire application source code each day can consume a lot of time. And then that's major thing that most of the scans are being kind of, being added recently to the OWASP list of, what kind of errors, what kind of static analysis, the errors that coming out from that scans are coming out. And the way we are thinking is to limit at the automated security analysis within the CI platforms of the vulnerable code that we are talking over here. Checking your code dependencies, yes, that's you already talked about. From the threat point of view, yes, this is the third-party software we are dealing with every day in, day out. Most of the enterprises are using open source software, and that to be, it has to be less commercial. We've been seen breaches from Log4j and the SolarWinds and whatnot. The main fuel over there is that the practices or the way they have implemented has not been thoroughly been tested over there, and the development has not been thoughtful from the open source libraries that has been run over the period of overall scans that has happened. So yes, don't bet off more than others can chew, I would say. It's just to introduce tools and some some practices within the environment can help more useful for the others to learn and emerge from the overall design what we are trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think it's really important to make the whole process as easy for your application developers as possible. You don't want them looking for shortcuts or looking for ways around your security guidance or ways to ignore your compliance as code implementations or suppressing errors or whatever it is. Like, it has to be easy for them to get their code into production in a safe way that meets the security requirements. So like Kapil said, it's like you need the automation. Everything needs to be very smooth. It's part of the CI/CD process. Code check-in to code in production, you know exactly what's going to happen. And the creativity isn't stymied in the application point, but no one really needs to be super creative with their cloud images or anything like that. Like, all that's already gonna be locked down for them. Here's what you need to be using. Just give it to them on a silver platter to say, here's your your more safe environment than what you might have chosen from the UI.
I'll tell you one thing that's really interesting from a tooling point of view, that companies often analyze the code and the applications that they're building for their customers and completely forget about the code and the applications that they use to build the code for their customers. Very meta, I know, but it's hugely important, right? Because if you think about your standard kind of CI/CD tool, yeah, that tool generally has access to every single environment in your estate.
A lot of access, yes.
Yeah. And yeah, it's always kind of forgotten about when it comes to security and things like that. So I think a really important thing when it comes to tooling is make sure you secure your tooling as well. And make sure you do threat modeling around your CI/CD pipelines and your how you're deploying into your different environments, because that's just as big an attack vector as the sites and applications that you're building for your customers.
Absolutely. I think the main key is to train your developers secure coding, which is missing right now. I've seen a lot of challenges are happening just because one of the biggest simply getting buy-in from the stakeholders is you put up your business case and organization combined. It would be a big struggle for the company, So getting investment and time needed to train your development team on secure coding has to be major challenge. And right now, which developers are seeing right now, we are often talk about such things, but it has to be embedded in the security culture of the organization. It has to be embedded in the overall theme, what the mission of the organization is going to be.
Absolutely. Your product managers need to understand it as well. Like that's one of the places where the portmanteau just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. It's like, exactly. It's prod ops too, right? It's like your product managers need to understand that we're going to be building this with a security mindset so that they understand what those requirements and additional time might be required for that. So,
yeah. And I think from a tooling point of view, I think one of the interesting challenges I've come across is, especially security tooling, is there's some really good open source security tooling out there, especially the OWASP stuff, OWASP Dependency Checker and OWASP Zap, Z-Attack Proxy, those kind of tools, open source. You have to kind of install and manage them yourself. I've found them a little bit troublesome. So you've got the open source market when it comes to finding security tools, and then you've got the commercial market. So things like Sneak and tools like that, which kind of offer you a suite of your dependency checkers, your container scanning, and all of that good stuff. But that comes at a hefty price, right? And actually sitting there and working out as an organization which tool is right for you is it can be tough at times as well.
Absolutely. And it adds to that cognitive load that we were talking about earlier. Like every time you add one of those components to your pipeline, you're thinking about how many dials and devices I can change and adjust, and where is it getting its updates, and it's
Yeah, so you mentioned it before, Mandy, where you're saying people will find ways around it. So I've seen you can implement these tools, right? And they can do scanning really well. But if they become a blocker then from delivering value to customers, teams will go in and go, just ignore that, just ignore that, just ignore that. And then it becomes a norm, and then the tool's completely useless.
Yes.
I hope you're all writing this down at home.
They'll get the recording. Notes. It's okay.
That's right. Yes, you'll get the record. This is great. I'm entertained by y'all. So, okay, we're limited on time. There were a lot of questions that came in. I'm definitely going to get to the questions. I want to encourage you to also submit questions, like we don't have enough questions to get through, and now I'm gonna kind of bounce around because I want to make sure some questions we get to before we open it up to the audience as well, and I promise we will give some time to you. So let's just get right into it. Okay, so we kind of built the team, we sort of know the process, we're sort of rolling, we have some tools, thank you for that. Now, how do we track, measure and communicate the success, right? Because no matter how well you do, unless you're like telling people about it and showing people proof you're doing it, it doesn't mean anything. So how do you do that? How do you track and measure and communicate the success of your DevSecOps practice?
That's a really interesting one, because as far as I'm aware, there's no DORA metrics for DevSecOps, right?
Right? They should add that.
Yeah. We should go speak to
It's
NATO
Just
Force
good.
Group.
All right, we're hanging up and we're going to go do that. We'll be
That-
right back, everyone.
It's hard to prove a negative, right? It's hard to say we would have gotten breached or we would have gotten, hacked or whatever if we hadn't done X, Y, and Z. That's a tough one, and I'm not.
Yeah, and I think you if you you've got to be really careful you don't end up in, the DORA metrics were kind of like a real eye opener to organizations, right? Because it was, people were measuring kind of everything, and I think they called them vanity metrics, right? They were great, loads of metrics. We do this, we closed this many tickets, we've done this much work, and we've wrote this many lines of code. And then DORA came along, and actually you only need to track these 4 metrics.
None of that matters.
Yeah. So with DevSecOps, I've got a feeling we're going to kind of have a similar situation where it's like we're tracking all of this information about how well we're doing with security, and I'm sure there'll be some some survey or some study somewhere that will come back and say, actually, you probably just need to track these 3 things, and they'll tell you that you're doing a good job from a security point of view. I think for me, ensuring you've got the right checks in the right place, continuously trying to improve them. I don't know how or if you could measure that, but that for me is a key kind of indicator that you're at least you're trying to improve over time.
Yeah,
but as in metrics. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's good too. And like a little selfishly from PagerDuty, like part of it too, I think, is having a good process in place in case something does happen. Like have that as something that you're also working on, thinking about if we do have some kind of vulnerability, what is our mechanism then for improving that and shortening that timeline as well. Thinking about some of these older vulnerabilities that took years and months to remediate across large enterprises, like there's no reason for something like another Heartbleed to happen and it takes a year to remediate, and working across some of those improvements as well, I think would be important.
Yeah, I think you're right. So definitely cool tools can attract and retain a lot of things. Making the investment on the right DevOps staff, which we are trying to do over here, is to not move away from the mission. The more important is to forefront on the latest innovation which is coming in the market, and it has to be pick the right size. What it means is to integrate the best teams, cross collaboration. That's the way you can attract and welcome the metrics. Yes, there is no, obviously this is something we are talking for long time, but I think it's just a way to create our own set of practice for the high performance teams to work, and self-reflection is most important over here. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to make this our last question of the pre-planned questions, and then we'll move into some audience questions. What is the next big breakthrough of DevSecOps?
Sure. So I'll go. There are a couple of things coming out. We are talking a lot about AI ops and whatnot in the industry, and specifically, the major thing that we have seen is the root cause analysis is that the operations are not being automated. Again, it's all about the real-time thing that we are talking, the machine learning and unlock the inside developers and accelerate innovation. So that's the first thing. Weighing too much on machine learning based observability versus AI operations. Yes, again, not all the software intelligence is created equal, right? So there's definitely a trend on weighing machine learning, and based on the approach that we are designing the algorithms on picking up the IT issues which is happening, the downtime, the unauthorized data access which is happening with the organization. So we have to reduce the burden on that IT stuff. So offloading the routine monitoring and the management task is way to enable, and that's a major trend that I think it's going to be seen over here. Yeah, that's two of my points.
Yeah, there's a couple from me. I think the world of low code, no code is really starting to get some traction. And I believe if they can build those platforms and the people building on those platforms are inherently building secure software, then that could be a bit of a game changer, right? I've played around with a few of them, and they're actually really, really, really good. Probably wouldn't use them for a production and enterprise level stuff, but they're really getting some traction. And I think if they can start to build those and make them secure off the bat, then yeah, that could be a really interesting thing to happen. And I think from an emerging point of view, I think the way these companies now, from a firewall and a bot management point of view, they're getting extremely good. I was working with a company maybe a year ago, and some of the technology that they're using from a bot management point of view was completely mind-blowing. It was like, they're using the telemetry off devices to tell whether the device is moving, whether the battery is at a certain percentage, and determining whether the user on the site was a bot or not, and then just kicking them off the site. If you could adjust the kind of the levels as to what was acceptable, but some of the things those kind of bot management software were checking was unbelievable, and the accuracy of them as well was quite good.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to see a lot more machine learning and things applied to this space than we had in the past. Like the time from the security teams being a bunch of gurus doing big thinking kind of work, and you talk to them when you have to, is really moving into having more of these tools, more of this flexibility around the solutions that are being offered. The machine learning stuff has been absolutely incredible, what's being found, what's out there. And you remember in the old days where you're like scanning through your access logs for the weird stuff that's coming in and then blocking IP spaces sort of in a manual way. Like that's all long gone, thankfully. And I think from the standpoint of things that will impact application developers, like a lot of this stuff is going to become more and more automated, a lot more invisible, and it's just going to be part of your practice. Like it's going to be automatically, you're going to get the most secure libraries. Automatically, you're going to get the most secure building processes. Some of that's going to come from the government. Like the US government in particular, federal governments, be more involved in what this looks like, especially since the breaches have impacted federal contractors the past couple of years. All that stuff's going to increase, I think, as well. So
yeah, DISA is working on that Department of Defense. So I think they have started this, combining the software factories into a common software factory for all the different verticals they are working on. So specifically, they have a lot of work is going on from that side, and definitely adoption of infrastructure as code is major right now, and definitely by 2023, I'm seeing, yes, this would be a automation. Organization will accept that, and there's definitely improving application deployment from that side as well. Yeah.
Every time I talk to Jamal, no matter the format, he always throws something out that managed to terrify me that I didn't know already. So thank you for that, Jamal. So, and thank you everyone on the panel. It has been an absolute pleasure. So let's move on now to some audience questions. I guess let's start with just an easy one for everyone. I believe you probably have something like this at your fingertips. What are some good books or material that you would recommend to effectively understand and implement DevSecOps?
It's a good question. I think for me, I think anything OWASP related. I've not read any kind of DevSecOps specific books, but OWASP for me is probably one of the best resources, open source resources out there when it comes to web application security. And there's so much material out there, and they offer some great tools as well to help you kind of embed security in your software development processes. So for me, it's got to be OWASP Foundation.
Yeah, so I think it's more important to see and attend a couple of trainings which are available on the marketplace, specifically on understanding some basic tooling or basic resources that you want to understand before you come and join the actual implementation of work, right? So having a basic clear like a cloud security or some kind of a developer platform, so you can definitely Google around. A lot of courses are there on Udemy and Coursera, and those courses are definitely useful. And from my side, I think OWASP is one of the other important thing which Jamal has pointed out. And yes, attending a lot of like DevSecOps Institute is one of the good source. You can definitely go and join some of the training and learn from the industry leaders what is they're talking about, and some of the good YouTube channels are there. You can definitely look at it and learn from there as well.
Just on that, there's two really good groups on LinkedIn as well. There's a DevSecOps group and a DevOps group. They're amazing. People and they're moderated as well, so people can only post kind of learnings and stuff like that in there. There's no kind of job offers allowed and all of that kind of stuff. So if you jump on LinkedIn and search in the groups for the DevOps group and the DevSecOps group, you'll find some really good material in there. People sharing some really cool stuff.
I think another good resource is DevSecCon. Is that the right one? It's a conference series that's been running for the last couple of years. A lot of their stuff's up on YouTube now to get a taste across different parts of the industry. Some is going to be around tooling, some is going to be around practices and culture and learning and all that kind of great stuff, so that it gives you a place for that. Another one for application developers, Tanya Janka's She Hacks Purple on Twitter. She has a book out, it came out last year, Alice and Bob Do Security or something like that. Another really good place to start if you not sure where you're headed, or if you're kind of new to the whole thing.
Yeah, there's some great conversation on Twitter following that hashtag, and I would highly recommend. Look, sometimes when you ask the internet for answers, you don't always get the right one, but I find that there are a lot of smart people on Twitter that you can follow on that.
Someone just said to me, if you write an incorrect answer somewhere, people always want to prove
correct it for you.
Exactly. They know